I talked about Georgism in this episode, which I was excited to do because once I encountered Georgism, sometimes I have like an idea, like I think land ownership is bogus. Like I think I believe in free markets and capitalism, but I don't understand. To me, land seems like a unique commodity, which isn't accounted for in the conventional land ownership structure of society that we're used to now and have accepted as being like the standard thing, even though throughout lots of human history it was not the standard thing at all. And so I remember like a few years ago, I was Googling about land ownership. I don't know. I was just doing research in that area, trying to see if other people were talking about this really or not. And then I stumbled across the Wikipedia page for Georgism, which lays out the exact same thing. And Henry George was this like American economist, and like he ran for mayor in New York City in like the 1800s. And when he published this book in like the mid 1800s, Progress and Poverty, it was like this big magnum opus that he wrote. It was like wildly popular, and it influenced a lot of people. A lot of like well-known political theorists and economists, and also just like random people, will cite Henry George as being like, and Progress and Poverty in particular, as being like a really big influence. And it sold like a ridiculous amount of copies at the time. But these days, like the name Georgism or Henry George is kind of been scrubbed from public memory, it seems, which is just surprising to me given the degree of influence the book had. And also because I think the most compelling thing about the argument he makes is he kind of corrects Marxism in a way that I find quite apt, where he says, like, basically he's trying to, the conceit of the book is he's trying to figure out why is it that as you see increasing material prosperity, we just had this big boon of the Industrial Revolution, all this crap, material conditions are deteriorating for, like, there's more and more people getting impoverished at the same time. So you're getting this bigger and bigger gap in your wealth. You're getting wealth inequality. Why is that happening when we have more prosperity than before? You'd think that the rising tide should be raising all ships. So what's going on here? And then he kind of determines that the answer to this question is that in like Marx's critique of capital, he's blaming the capitalist for exploiting the worker, but really the capitalist is providing their own risk and value into the transaction by providing an opportunity for employment, guaranteeing a wage more or less, investing in the venture to begin with, having to adopt the risk if the thing fails, if their employee leaves, blah, blah, blah. They are taking on all the uncertainty and all the upfront cost as well, which then they need to be rewarded for at some point. And so that's actually a fair trade. But the problem is that this is normally occurring on land, which the landowner, if you own the land as well, then you can charge, basically, if you've got a rising population and the land is staying the same, then as population rises and there's more people who need to work, if the people who occupy the land are the ones who can control who's allowed to work the land, they get to choose, hire, allow, whatever, who can come on and who they give a salary to and who can't, then you force everyone into conditions of wage slavery because now there's like demand for work rather than being demand for workers, because the workers can only work on the land if they're allowed to. So you're divorcing man's ability to like have a right to the fruits of his labor in the Lockean framework, because he can't touch the soil. He can't mix his labor with the earth because he can't touch the earth because some other guy, he's got a fence around it. And that's the problem. So that was just a very compelling argument. I think George really nailed it. And then I talked about in the thing, I'm very anti-private property. I've been for a very long time. Sorry, when I say private property, I mean land ownership. Private property is fine. And you can have effective political systems, I believe, where you just... So the thing is then, okay, well, who owns the land? The government owns the land. The government is the one who's securing the occupation of the land in the first place. The government is the one who's guarding the borders, ostensibly. And the government is reliant upon the populace, its citizens, to support the government. So you've got this, the people are providing the taxes and the military and whatever, the ballot, to put the government into power, and then the government possesses the power, and then they safeguard the territory that the people occupy. So you've got this reciprocal relationship between the two. So then the land should be the common right of all of the people who live there. But its custody should belong to the government itself, who then decides how the people may use it, with there being an understanding that everyone has a natural entitlement to the earth. And then the way that you have people still be able to own a house or whatever is that instead of owning land in perpetuity, which is how you get these dramatic problems of income inequality, because now you will just have this self-perpetuating feedback loop for so long as you own land. And if you own a big chunk of downtown Manhattan, it's probably going to be valuable for a very large time into the future of human history, and you'll never have to do anything in order to profit off of it. You're not mixing your labor with the soil anymore. You're just taking the thing that your dad gave you, that his grandpa gave him, whatever, down a long line. So you're profiting unjustly without having to work yourself, and meanwhile you're preventing anyone else from being able to grow wealthy in the process, I guess. So what's my point with all of this? People should own the land collectively. You pay rent to the government annually for the space that you occupy. You determine the price of the property based on how desirable it is within the community, based on two factors. To a lesser degree, the actual natural splendor of the area. If it's like right by the beach or something, or like right centrally located, people probably want it more. But the problem with being centrally located is that the thing that you're centrally located to is other people. So the main way that the land derives its wealth is not inherent to the earth that it happens to be upon. There's nothing particularly valuable about a little island, on the east coast of the United States. It's the fact that a bunch of other people are there, and there's a lot of shit going on there that you want access to, that then causes the prices to increase and increase. So if the people are the ones that are creating if the community is what makes the land valuable, then the community should benefit from anyone who's occupying it exclusively, basically. So that's the idea. Everyone then shares in the wealth that the land generates, because then you pay a tax. Everyone who has a little bit of Manhattan pays their high taxes to the local government, and then the local government can take those taxes and then redisseminate it into the community according to the needs of the broader community. So then as who happens to be occupying the land at the time prospers because of their unique access to the territory, they also better everyone else around them who's allowing them access to this territory. So you're bridging the divide, the exploitation problem before, from some guy just having unfair access to something because somebody else gave it to him a long time ago, or he happened to have wealth, whatever. But like the idea that you can occupy one space and forever forward into the time doesn't make any sense. Like your occupation of the land is always going to be contingent upon at least the state itself. So in the On Land episode of Wonderland, that's kind of the thing I laid out, is like land is contingent upon the state. So we shouldn't fool ourselves in pretending that you can just own something forever. So that was the Georgism component, if anyone has any questions. And then the way you kind of rectify, so if somebody, I live in an apartment building right now, the apartment building would pay rents to the local government based on kind of like the market demand, whatever the market valuation of the property is, which you can determine. There's all sorts of ways you can determine that. That's not really the issue. If it was to be kind of maximally utilized by the community. So then you also have this thing where if someone wanted to build a house instead on an area that's really centrally located where there's a lot of demand for it, then you'd have to be able to afford the cost of paying the rent every single year to offset the demand for that space. So basically it forces you to use the land in a way that's maximally efficient, or if it's not maximally efficient, then you are taking on the cost of that inefficiency as your own flex, basically. So the apartment building would still profit because of the baseline amenities and conveniences it offers, right? It's giving you a place to stay. There's a front desk, there's a laundry, there's a pool upstairs, whatever, all the maintenance fees of the building and everything. They'd still charge me for all that stuff, but they're just not profiting in any greater long-term generative capacity because they just can forever rent to people here. Anyways, we'll move on to something else.